Hi, I'm Susan Shaner with Sage Leadership Strategies, and I'm your host today of Community Forum. And I have the great pleasure to have with me Alice Hutchinson, who's running for Senate, State Senate, in the 24th District in Connecticut. Welcome, Alice.
Thank you, Susan, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
So, can you just fill our viewers in on what towns make up the 24th District?
The 24th District is all of the city of Danbury, all of New Fairfield, all of Sherman, and a part of Bethel.
Okay.
So it's those four municipalities.
Great. And you're running on the Democratic ticket?
I'm running on the Democratic line, yes.
Okay. Can you give our viewers just a brief background on your history, how long you've been in the greater Danbury area?
Sure. I moved up to Bethel in 1979 with my brand new husband and lived in Bethel since then, raised both our children in Bethel. Got involved, my first involvement in town issues was the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I started off as an alternate in 1987 in the summer, and then by that fall I ran for a full seat and won. Ran for several terms. I was 16 years on planning and zoning. Worked on a plan of development, worked on several different revisions to regulations to do with affordable housing, you know, farm regulations, sewer and water, that kind of thing. So I really loved land use. I stayed there on purpose. I didn't just do it, you know, because it was something to do.
Yeah.
I really was fully engaged in that. And the opportunity came in 2003 to run for First Selectman, actually 2002, but I ran and won the seat and served a term as the First Selectman in Bethel from 2003 to 2005.
So you were straight on planning and zoning, and then right from planning and zoning you went to First Selectman?
Yes.
So how would you characterize what your greatest accomplishments were there in that position?
Oh, I really feel very proud of the work I did as a First Selectman. I established best practices for hiring. They had no format for hiring employees. I negotiated 4 union contracts. I managed a $54 million budget. I applied for several grants that turned out to be grants that came in over a number of years afterwards that have had great benefit to the town. Air conditioning for the senior center downstairs, road improvement, sidewalk improvement. My specialty on planning and zoning, and something that it's one of those questions that people ask, what would you do over again if you had it to do over again? I love infrastructure improvements. I sat on the 84 improvement study back in the day when I was on planning and zoning, and got the opportunity as a First Selectman to serve on the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities Transportation Task Force as we're looking at all of the exits on 84, looking at rail improvement, highway improvement.
So you love that? A lot of people wouldn't love that. What do you love about that?
I do, and when you look at it, it's a very compelling issue, because if you look at the New York border all the way through to Newtown, and the routes that go north and south that get to New Fairfield and to Sherman, I do think that a lot of the road improvements and the infrastructure, the highway infrastructure, has needed some serious attention for years.
Yeah.
They've talked about improving I-84 for at least 10 or 15 years now, adding an extra exit at exit 5, the 5-6 interchange, that whole area, rebuilding exit 8 so that it comes onto the highway a little differently at the Danbury-Bethel line. And certainly if they don't keep 37 and 39 in good shape, it's the main artery from the north into Danbury, where everyone has to come to get onto the highway.
So what do you love about it? That there's a lot of opportunity to make improvements? Or
I will simplify. Yes, that's the big issue. The simple issue is it uses good organizational skills that I have.
Oh, okay. Okay, it's great. It's an opportunity for you to leverage your strengths.
It is something that I like.
Yeah.
And so getting involved in it was a natural for me.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of the municipalities have, as a municipal CEO looking back on it, I think that a lot of the roads now have suffered due to economic downturn. because the municipalities, in most cases, other than the routes, are the responsibilities of those municipalities, and their budgets obviously have taken quite a hit.
Yeah, it's gone on the back burner.
I know in the case of Bethel's budget, they used the highway department as they rated it to balance other parts of the budget in the last administration, and they're paying for it now. So it's a lot of catch up when municipalities, can pay attention to it. They need to keep the maintenance of buildings and the infrastructure, the sewer, water, and infrastructure in good shape for the sake of the community.
I've lived in Bethel for 12 years, and I was surprised when I first came to Bethel, and I continue to be surprised, I guess if that's the right terminology. I guess like a lot of small towns, it seems like a lot of sticky issues that get protracted. And when I first came, the year I moved in was 98, and that year it took like 5 or 6 times to pass the budget. What were some of your sticky challenges in that role, and how did you address them?
Well, towns are different than cities. The city has the Common Council, so the council deals with the budget very differently than the smaller towns. The smaller towns, I know it's charter-driven. In Bethel's case, you go to referendum. And now that the budgets are split, everyone was a little afraid of having a town budget and an education budget, voted on separately. But it has turned out to be good, because I'm always pleasantly surprised when the citizens of any municipality pay as much attention as they do.
They certainly do.
And I'm pleasantly surprised. I think watching Danbury's budget process this year, going to the public hearing where so many parents stood up and so many teachers were there asking for education funding, how it would impact the schools. I'll never in my life forget sitting in the Common Council chambers and watching this one art teacher say that if the superintendent cuts back the positions that he's talking about cutting back, there will be one art teacher for 1,400 students.
How do we get in that position?
How do we get in that position?
It's just so undervalued, the arts.
Now you're talking about the bigger picture here. So when you start talking about the bigger picture, I can give you the example, a specific example of when I was first selectman. In education, you have to fund special needs. It's mandated that most special needs, there's very specific criteria for funding in education. When I was first selectman, there were certain categories of special needs that were mandated to be funded, and the state funded them at 40%. That was when they wrote the law. By the time I got in as municipal CEO, it was funded at 6.5%.
That's quite a disparity.
So as the federal government cuts back, it cuts back to the state, and as the state cuts back, it cuts back to the municipalities, and yet by law you still have to provide for these children, and you want to provide for these children because the intention of the law is an honorable one. So that's where I think a municipal CEO can kick back to the state and push against those mandates, and that someone, either a legislator or a senator, a House member or a senator, can push back at the federal government and say, if you are going to require this of us, you need to provide a funding source.
So that is one issue in particular that you see yourself
important.
playing in that arena.
I think there are some designated funding sources that have been agreed upon that have slipped by that need to be taken a look at again to make sure that certain funding sources are in place, particularly when it comes to education. We cannot let our schools slip. And you look at the loss of youth in the state of Connecticut, principally because there aren't jobs for them. And that should not exist. I look at my 29-year-old son just moved to New Hampshire, for instance. He couldn't find a job here. Now, Connecticut has some of the most amazing higher institutions of learning in the country. It has some of the best schools in the country. We should be keeping that well-educated, well-trained youth here but many of them are moving away just because it's too expensive to live here. The other problem that we have with job loss in the state of Connecticut, because they're going to Rhode Island and Massachusetts and New York and other places in the country, is we've lost over 53,000 manufacturing jobs since 2002.
But let's stick on the issue of state-mandated, educational requirements. And if the state is mandating it and not funding it, and you're saying part of where you see yourself playing is pushing back on that, I mean, in the current economic climate, I mean, we know the state and what went through this year just to pass the budget, and looking at where we're going to be in 2 years from a state level if we don't do some serious better management of the budget. So where does the money come from if everybody's putting mandates but passing the buck? Because nobody has the money.
That's a very huge question, and I'll try and tackle it in as short an answer as possible. Because if anybody running this year, or anyone in any government position this year, isn't standing up and saying economy and jobs are the two biggest issues, then they're completely out of touch with reality. How you attack those two issues really is not just a philosophical difference, although that's certainly a part of it. There's specific differences. In the state of Connecticut right now, we're going to have a new governor. I mean, for the first time in a very long time, we know that. Our current governor, Governor Rell, is not running for office, so it's either going to be Tom Foley or it's going to be Dan Malloy. And I think it's incumbent upon the voters to dig down to their issues and really ask the tough questions. I happen to be a very strong Malloy supporter, and I very much stand behind his economic plan, his jobs creation plan. Once you get leadership that has an articulated plan in office.
Okay, so for our voters, I mean our audience who are not following that, can you just give us an overview snapshot on what that platform is and what specifically you're supporting?
Dan's platform includes, and is not all of the platform, there are incentives for businesses to stay here. Some of them are good incentives, and some of them are not. They either need to be adjusted one way or another. That's a simplistic, very simplistic answer. Two, there is no reason why we are not the Silicon Valley of the East. We clearly have the trained personnel. We clearly need to retain those jobs, but one of the reasons jobs can't stay in this state is the high cost of energy, the high cost of utilities. So how that's dealt with, the devil's in the details with that. A lot of the governors, but the governor's going to drive a lot of that issue, and then the rest of us have to go to our electorate and say, is this how we want to deal with it? I want to vote, I want to represent you. So as we go out and we start to articulate things like, yes, we need to renegotiate electrical rates. I mean,
let me ask you
that's just a very small example.
We've got a lot of challenges today, and a lot of people are saying, you're crazy to throw your hat in the ring. What made you decide to run for Senate, and at this particular point in time?
It took me a long time to make the decision, because I loved being the first selectman of Bethel, and I felt very fulfilled by it. And when it was over, I was very happy to work very hard to get other people elected. I became Democratic Town Committee Chair in Bethel. I helped the current first selectman get elected, and I loved working on campaigns. But as this opportunity came up, I realized one of the things that was disturbing to me in the legislature was the response of a lot of the Republicans, particularly my opponent, that became what has become sort of an unfair slogan of the Party of No. I find that much more applicable at the federal level. I do think there are people at the state who are willing, on both sides of the aisle, to work very hard to find compromises, to find good direction. I don't find that they're working well together now. I think that there's a lot to be fixed and a lot to work on, and I think that the towns and the cities need people who have run towns and cities going in and saying the tax structure is strangling us. It is hurting us. You cannot continue to trickle down these expenses that you've mandated because it's choking the municipalities. So municipal CEOs have a unique perspective of saying what you're passing is not inappropriate. The intention is good, but you need to understand what it looks like from where we are.
Yeah, you're saying that with your background and experience doing that, you can help educate and influence folks who maybe don't realize all the implications.
Sure.
At the local level.
One of the other things I did before I was first selectman, I worked at Sacred Heart University. My master's is in teaching. I student taught in 8th grade in the middle school in Bethel for Bill Benzing, who's no longer with us, just a beloved teacher. But I worked at Sacred Heart. I was employed after I got my master's there, working on their self-study for the teacher certification program. I know what it takes in a teacher training program to get teachers certified in the state of Connecticut, and what it takes to keep them, what it takes to educate them, what the fast track to a master's or a certification means. I think it's important to do everything we can to support our school systems. But more and more and more of the funding for that is on the backs of the municipalities. So I understand the educational issues and how the school systems need that kind of support, and how the intentions of the legislature are great, and they take a great deal of time working on getting good legislation that supports children and educates them well. Bethel is a wonderful school system. I know this whole area has great school systems. Danbury is a marvelous school system. Sherman and New Fairfield as well. But as the state cuts back its funding, by necessity, the burden then falls on the municipalities, and someone needs to raise the white flag and go, okay, something's got to give, because we're not paying any less for it.
Yeah. So what would you say to voters now who have seen how different kinds of issues have gotten played out, whether on the state level or the federal level, with the two parties not playing nice with each other, and we're kind of all in this mess together to try to figure it out? So what would be your approach and how you would articulate your influence strategies and how you can be a catalyst for real change? Because I think what we've all seen, and some folks are getting cynical towards it, to say, there's a lot of this infighting versus, we've got to figure this out together.
I think and in answer to your question, coming in kind of the back door, I was as insulted as anybody else with the mail and the ads that came through in this last primary cycle. I could not believe.
Because it got really nasty.
It was very nasty, all the way up and down on both sides.
So how do you, and tensions are running high, and emotions are running high, and people have got a lot of strong ideological positions, as well as, there's a lot of fear circulating in the economy around the money and where's the money going to come from. So, how do you keep your center and cut through all that to focus on the issues and make some headway in a productive way?
First of all, I have Democratic and Republican friends in the legislature, both of whom have great ideas. I would suggest that anyone who comes in with a categoric no provide an alternative.
So it's not okay to just veto. You've got to come in with some constructive alternatives.
I feel strongly about groups of the Democrats and Republicans. They want to caucus, and they want to come to consensus, and they want to have one mind. That's not a wrong thing. And we have worked, our government, since the beginning of the United States of America, has worked on, sorry, I'm just trying to say too much. There's too much running through my mind.
Yeah.
As people have to come to terms, there has to be compromise somewhere.
Yeah.
Somewhere. It cannot simply be yes and no. There has to be a working together. And I think if there's a pledge and some level of government, and I know that the federal government has real issues that I can't even begin to touch in terms of cooperation and getting along. But I do know that there are people working very hard to pull people in, and I know that Congressman Murphy was talking about having breakfast with friends, with freshman congressmen of both parties, and some people want to come, but they're, getting kickback from their own people. And I really would like to meet with people regularly, find out what they think, try and work with it. But I do think a new governor is going to set the tone.
And so you're saying...
My only request is that these campaigns, if they get this dirty, again, for the general election, it's going to drive people away from the polls, and we will never know what the electorate wants, because they'll just get turned off, and that's not okay.
So the responsibility is to the constituents and the voters to not let it go there.
To the issues. Exactly. Exactly.
So many times people make selections on putting people in certain positions based on past behavior or performance and try to project that forward. Whenever you hire somebody for a job, right? So if we were to go down that line of thinking, how would you characterize your greatest strengths and accomplishments, let's say, as CEO of Bethel, and your greatest development needs and how you address those?
My strengths are organizational strengths. I'm very good at seeing where the problem is and facilitating a solution. I like to bring in a lot of people. I like to hear what a lot of different thinking is. Working with the departments, I had staff meetings regularly. I also firmly believe in allowing your management staff to implement that thinking, that once a decision's made, you let your department head implement it throughout. I believe in lines of authority. I think it's great.
So what's the balance point between working the consensus approach and bringing people in and trying to cut through some of that with speed, especially since we've got a lot of very pressing issues where decisions need to be made? What's that balance point?
You just have to know your people. It takes a great deal of work to find out who are the people that you need to speak to on any given issue. So with most people in this kind of a leadership position, you spend a great deal of time mining the thought processes and mining the thinking and the solutions that other people have to either use them, incorporate them, have them compromise in their own way. Each department was so different. Obviously, the tax department is not going to have the same kind of needs as planning and zoning or the highway department or the health department.
So you're saying
the bigger issues.
You take the right amount of time to know the people, know the issues, and kind of how to work it behind the scenes. So that's a strength. What would you say was your greatest development need, or something that you would do differently? You mentioned something before, but development need and kind of how you addressed it, because nobody's perfect, right?
That is a lovely way of saying, what are my weaknesses? I will tell you, I do not delegate enough.
Okay.
I bring in people, and then I make decisions, but I need to then really let it go.
So how do you do that? Because the Senate job is a bigger job than,
it's a different job, so it's not the same kind of delegation. The difference with the municipal CEO is the buck really does stop with you, so you need to have your hands in a lot of things. The difficulty is kind of letting them go and trusting that the people will be able to fulfill that directive. Very different job. It gave me skills that I can use for this job in terms of understanding the law, in terms of understanding the needs of a community, in terms of understanding the legislative process much better. I can take that to Hartford. The process of working with other people is much more, it doesn't have the same authority structure at all.
So greater need and opportunity to work through influencing. No?
It may not be the right word, but you've got the right idea.
So how would you characterize it?
It's really coming together on direction. I mean, if you know that your 4 towns have a certain need, let's speak to Candlewood Lake issues, because it's a non-Bethel issue. Danbury, Sherman, and New Fairfield all have issues with the lake. The Candlewood Lake Authority obviously has a great deal of play with that. The Common Council and the boards of selectmen obviously have strong feelings as to the authority of the lake. You have to work with the municipality, but then you work with other senators on water issues. I mean, it depends on what kind of law you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Well, there's
So
the
you're saying
legislative side of it and there's the money side of it.
Yeah, so you're characterizing it as coming to consensus on direction. So help me understand, how does it not entail having some nuance and finesse with influencing and getting kind of everybody all on the same page? You're saying it's not really that. How would it?
It can be, but that's actually, well, it depends on whether you're talking about changing a law that would impact those municipalities with respect to, for example, the lake.
Yeah.
As an example.
Yeah.
Or whether you're talking about a funding source for something for the lake.
Yep.
Two different processes. One has proposals and committees and public hearings and
Yep.
really listening to a constituency and coming and bringing that, and then you build consensus within your own body, and you find, I mean, there's committees and research and there's a huge process on how a bill becomes a law.
Yeah.
That's a different thing
Yeah.
than finding a funding source for milfoil,
Yeah.
or whatever
Yeah.
that need is. So it's a different job, and yet keeping in mind that all three of those municipalities have very different needs, but there is a common place that they can come together on. And it may be that the mayors and first selectmen can do that through the Housatonic Valley Council of Election, of Housatonic Valley Council of Elected Officials, or they need to meet with their legislator to articulate their need.
Yeah. So just a quick recap. So understanding the different requirements for the job for Senate and what you bring to the table and development needs, kind of, how would you kind of summarize that in like a headline in terms of the value that you would bring to this role?
You mean like my campaign slogan?
Yeah.
My campaign slogan is "People come first."
Okay. So if somebody listening today wanted to contact you, whether they had a question, concern they wanted to raise with you, how might they do that?
We have just put up my website. It's aliceforsenate.com. It is not as fully fleshed out this week, but it might be by next week. If they want to go puddling around, they can certainly find my email address there. My home phone number's on there, which I've always kept published, so people can find me that way very easily.
Okay, so aliceforsenate.com. They could either email you, call you up, and have a conversation if they'd like to, knowing that your platform will be more fully fleshed out in the next couple weeks.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate the time.
Okay. I'm Susan Shaner. Until next time with Community Forum. Thank you.